Theatrephonic presents The Private Investigator, Winter Reprise. Written by Barbara Jennings.
When a dame gets under your skin, in my experience, she stays there. A tune, a perfume, the tilt of a hat, or the sound of a laugh remind you of her, and there she is, back in your mind. It was like that with Lydia Kenny. On a sweltering day in the summer of 1947, she'd come high-heeled tapping up the stairs to my shabby office. A beautiful, unhappy widow, and she'd asked me to find Maurice. Folk go missing more often than you might expect, and it's mostly private investigators who look for him. I figured straight off this runaway was some no-good gigolo who'd got his claws into a susceptible woman. Turned out Maurice was Mrs. Tierney's pet cat, but I'd summed up his character pretty well. Whether it was on account of her looks or my bank balance, I don't know, but I took the case. Sometimes I wonder why I gave up the regular pay and prospect of a pension I had as a cop. Then I remember the graft and corruption I saw in the force and how I wanted a fresh start when I came home after the war. A printer ran off a heap of flyers about Maurice for me the same day, offering a modest reward. Mrs. Tierney would have promised 10 times as much, but that would have landed us with a string of hopeful Maurice lookalikes. I drew a circle on a map with Mrs. Tierney's house at the center and paid somebody to deliver the flyers to all the premises in the circle. Mrs. Tierney rang twice a day to check on progress, so when the flyers drew a blank, I began prowling the neighborhood myself. Armed with a photo of Maurice, and with sweat trickling down my back, I scoured alleyways and public gardens, here and there knocking on doors and asking people to look in their sheds and garages. A short distance to the east, before you reach the highway, the roads got narrower and the houses a whole lot smaller. Still well maintained and respectable for the most part. It was outside one of these sliding houses that I spotted my quarry, sunbathing under a front window. And he wasn't alone. Maurice was curled up against a sleek, classy feline with sharply pointed ears. A middle-aged woman answered my knock. She had the air of someone life had chewed on for a while and spat out. At first she assumed I was a pal of her husband's, which didn't make me popular. From our brief conversation, I got the impression Mrs. Brody spent a lot of time making sure her old man brought his pay envelope home rather than distributing the contents to bartenders and bookmakers. I don't think she'd even noticed Maurice was hanging around her cat. And if she had, it would only have confirmed her low opinion of the male sex in general. She pocketed the reward and shut the door in my face. I scooped up and affronted Maurice and took him back to Lydia Tierney's loving arms. I wished I made somebody's face light up like that just by coming through the door. Mrs. Tierney was a generous woman. She gave me a bonus and $25 for Mrs. Brody to thank her for looking after Maurice. I didn't like to disillusion her by pointing out no looking after had taken place. So I put the $25 in an envelope with a brief covering note and dropped it into Mrs. Brody's mailbox. I hadn't seen Mrs. Tierney since then, but, like I said, when a dame gets under your skin... Now it was winter, grey and cold. The radiator in my office was a big, tough-looking beast, but it gave out more noise than heat. and there was a tiny gap between the window and a corner of its frame that let in an icy draft so sharp you could have used it as a paper knife. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon, trying to ignore my surroundings and concentrate on the surveillance case I was working on, when Laura Tierney came back into my life.
Mr. Webster, I need your help. I'm sorry, I should have made an appointment, but I'm not thinking straight.
Good to see you again, Mrs. Tierney. Take a seat. Is it Maurice?
No, Maurice is fine. It's... Oh, something horrible has happened. I don't know what to do. Somebody's trying to blackmail me.
Keep calm, Mrs. Tierney, and tell me all about it.
2 days ago, I had a letter saying something foul.
These walls are unshockable. Go on.
It said that I'd murdered my husband and it would cost $5,000 to keep it quiet. And then today I got another letter saying that I should get the money ready and I'd be sent instructions of where to take it in a week's time.
Have you got the letters?
Here.
The blackmailer had read too many detective stories. Each word had been cut out of a newspaper and pasted onto a sheet of cheap notepaper. Must have taken hours. These come in the regular mail?
Yes.
Were the envelopes the same? Words cut out of newspapers?
No, they were handwritten.
Have you got them?
No. I threw them on the fire. I nearly burned the letters too, but then I thought maybe I shouldn't.
Did you notice the postmark on the envelopes?
No. Oh, I guess that would have helped.
Never mind. The main thing is you kept the letters. There should be a class in high school teaching kids how to deal with crime. Things like never interfere with a crime scene and don't destroy potential evidence. I made a mental note to write to my congressman about it. Do you have any idea who wrote the letters?
No, none at all.
There's no one with a grudge against you?
No, not that I know of. And if anybody did have a grudge against me, why wait all this time?
When did Mr. Tierney die?
May 15th last year.
18 months ago. You're not gonna like this, Mrs. Tierney, but did you murder your husband?
Mr. Webster, how can you ask that?
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. I need my clients to be completely honest with me. Don't be offended.
I most certainly did not murder Hal. And I had no reason to. I loved him.
But did he leave you well off?
Yes, but not so well off as when he was alive.
Tell me about Mr. Tierney. How did you meet?
I was barely 19 when I came to New York. I'm from the South originally, but I expect you'd work that out. I had my heart set on being a dancer, but I just wasn't good enough. I failed one audition after another. One day, I was walking across the park, going back to my boarding house, and I was wondering how I was going to pay the rent, and the heel snapped off my shoe. It seemed like the last straw, and I sat down on a bench and I cried. Then, this man in a suit with a briefcase stopped and asked me what was wrong. And I showed him my shoe, and would you believe he fished out this tiny pot of glue out of his briefcase and fixed the heel right back on. Hal always carried a whole lot of bits and pieces he might need sometime, more like an engineer than a liar. Anyway, he said to wait a few minutes for the glue to dry before I walked on the shoe, and he sat with me, and he had such a kind face. It was like talking to your favorite uncle, and I told him all my troubles. Then he walked me back to the boarding house, and that evening he took me out to dinner and offered me a loan to tide me over until I got a job. Well, of course I said no, thinking that's the way a girl gets to be a kept woman, but Hal wasn't like that. When he said no strings, he meant no strings. We went on seeing each other, and 2 months later, we were married.
How long were you together?
11 years. I suppose his friends thought it might strange at first, him being way older than me, and maybe they thought I was a gold digger, or although I come from a very good family, why, my grandmother was distantly related to General Robert E. Lee. But once they could see Hal was contented and I loved him for himself and I wasn't asking him for fur coats and diamonds, they were real nice to me.
Can you tell me how he died? Take your time.
It was a Wednesday. Hal played golf in the morning. He'd retired by then, so golf didn't have to wait until the weekend. I was pleased he felt up to it because he'd been out of sorts for a few days. When he got back, we had lunch, and then he said he'd go to lie down for a while. He often took an afternoon nap, so I didn't worry. After about an hour, I went up to see if he needed anything, and he just slipped away.
Was there anyone else in the house?
Mrs. Persky, my daily help. I yelled down the stairs, and she came running up from the kitchen. She said, "He's passed, ma'am, but see how peaceful he looks. You sit there by him, and I'll fetch you a drop of brandy, and then I'll phone for the doctor." She's such a kind woman, the sort you can trust.
Has Mrs. Persky been with you long?
Since we moved into that house, a few months after we got married.
But she doesn't live in?
No. She comes in every day except Sunday. She's real particular about not working on Sundays. She only lives 20 minutes walk away, but Hal would always give her a lift if it was raining hard or icy underfoot. He was considerate to everyone.
And I'm sorry to press you on this, Mrs. Tierney. There was never any doubt that your husband died of natural causes?
No, never. Oh, Mr. Webster, what should I do?
My advice is to wait for the third letter. We'll make up a dummy package that looks like $5,000. You deliver it, and I'll be hanging around to see who picks it up.
Isn't there anything you can do sooner than that? I'm nearly out of my mind with worry, knowing there's somebody out there who could be so mean to me. I didn't sleep a wink last night.
Okay, Mrs. Tierney. Leave the letters with me, and I'll see what I can do.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I knew I could rely on you.
Bum, bum.
If you are enjoying Theatrephonic, come join us in the green room by becoming a patron. Just £2 a month will get you ad-free episodes. £5 a month and you will also have blooper reels, after-show question and answer sessions, the occasional bonus episode and exclusive Theatrephonic merch. Our £10 top tier also gives you the opportunity to attend a live play recording, as well as a chance to name a character in an episode. Head along to theatrephonic.com/Patreon for more information.
Bum, bum.
I spent the next morning on my surveillance case, following a guy whose wife thought he was cheating on her. She was right, of course. Wives usually are. Those cases are a private investigator's bread and butter. It's a grubby business, but then it's a grubby world. By noon, I'd got enough evidence to put Romeo squarely in the wrong when he reached the divorce court. I dropped the film in to be developed and printed, grabbed a beer and a sandwich, and headed back to the office. I fiddled with the radiator valve to no effect, wedged some paper in that annoying gap in the window, lit a cigarette, and settled down to ponder Mrs. Tierney and her blackmail letters. I didn't bother dusting them for fingerprints. Anybody who took the trouble to cut every word out of a newspaper would have thought of that. And I didn't have any doubts about Laura Tierney's innocence. She wouldn't have come to me if she was guilty. But who was likely to have a grudge against her? And if anyone had reason to be suspicious about Hal Tierney's death, why wait 18 months? Unless the blackmailer didn't bear a grudge or think for 2 seconds Mrs. Tierney was a murderer, but needed money and knew she had plenty. Someone Mrs. Tierney would never suspect because she believed him to be kind. I thought it through a tad more. Then I reached for the phone book. There were maybe 15 Perskys listed, but only one with an address 20 minutes walk from Mrs. Tierney's house. I snatched up my hat and coat, gave the radiator a kick in passing, and headed back down to the street. The car took some coaxing into life. It didn't like winter any more than I did. I parked a short distance away and strolled past the Persky house. It looked as I'd expected. Immaculate paintwork, clean windows, and a tidy front yard with manicured bushes. I walked on to the grocery store at the corner and turned left. Half a dozen more houses, and I'd reached Mrs. Brody's. It had got even more run down since the summer. A piece of the gutter was hanging loose, and there was a broken rocking chair in the front yard. I went down a side alley to where the garbage cans lived. Burrowing in garbage cans is one of the many unsavory aspects of a detective's existence, but you'd be surprised how often it's worth it. Under coffee grounds, cabbage leaves, and the contents of several dozen ashtrays, I found a pile of newspaper with spaces where words had been snipped out. I folded a few of the cleaner sheets and put them in my pocket. Went back to the front door and knocked. Panic showed in Mrs. Brody's face for half a second. Then she gave me the sort of look most people reserve for cockroaches.
You again, Seamus? Looking for another cat?
No, I'm looking for whoever's been making paper dolls out of this newspaper.
You've got no right to go snooping in my garbage can.
Did I mention your garbage can? I'm guessing it won't be hard to match these gaps in the words to the blackmail letters you sent Mrs. Tierney.
I don't know what you're talking about. Beat it.
She tried to shut the door, but my foot was in the way. Let me tell you what I figure happened. You were short of dough, even shorter than usual, and you couldn't think of anyone who'd help you out. Then you remembered Mrs. Tierney, who sent you $25 just because her cat palled up with yours. Easy enough to look up her address in the phone book, as you knew roughly where she lived. But how to ask her for money? You thought back to that cat incident. Maybe at the time, a neighbor told you Mrs. Persky in the next street works for Mrs. Tierney. You didn't know Mrs. Persky, but you managed to strike up a conversation in the grocery store on the corner. You found out Mrs. Tierney's on her own, and her husband died a year or so back. Then you got to work with your scissors and paste.
You can't prove that load of baloney. Who's gonna listen to a two-bit gumshoe?
This two-bit gumshoe happens to be an ex-cop with friends in the police and the district attorney's office. The part about the DA's office was stretching the truth, but she wasn't to know that.
You reckon your precious Mrs. Tierney will want to prosecute and see her name all over the papers with everyone saying no smoke without fire?
No, but I don't think you want to end up in prison with your friends, if you have any, reading those same papers. People have a pretty low opinion of blackmailers.
It's easy enough for you to preach, mister. You don't spend your life waiting to see whether your old man's gonna come home drunk or sober, or if he's not gonna come home at all, because he's taken up with some cheap floozy, and trying to figure out how to put food on the table and pay the bills.
My heart bleeds for you. Okay, I'm not gonna call the cops, but if Mrs. Tierney gets any more unpleasantness, any at all, I'll be back on this doorstep faster than you can say cat litter. Understood? I moved my foot and gave her the opportunity to shut the door in my face a second time. The temperature had dropped 3 or 4 degrees, and sleet was starting to fall as I hurried to the car. I drove back to the office and experienced a minor miracle. The room was warm. That last kick I gave the radiator on the way out must have done it. While I was wondering how much to tell Mrs. Tierney, I heard her footsteps on the stairs.
Mr. Webster, I was just passing, so I thought I'd look in and see if there's any news.
This isn't a street ladies like Mrs. Tierney just pass along, but I let that go. There is news, and it's all good. I was about to call you. Have a seat. I didn't exactly lie to her, but I edited the truth, playing up Mrs. Brody's marital and financial problems. At one point, I thought I'd overdone it, and Mrs. Tierney would be sending her money anyway.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Webster. I can't tell you what a load this is off my mind. I'm so grateful. How much do I owe you?
I'll put the bill in the mail once I've worked it out. The sleet had turned to snow and was making itself at home. It was real cozy with her there in the warm office. But I remembered she'd admired Hal Tierney for his considerate ways. Snow's coming down fast. Should I call you a cab?
Oh, I guess I could wait until it eases up, if you don't mind.
My pleasure. Would you like a drink? I'm afraid I've only got bourbon.
Oh, bourbon's swell.
Water?
Please.
She took off her gloves and laid them neatly on the desk. I wiped the glasses as discreetly as I could and tried to act like everyone kept their liquor in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. In that corner of my mind, reserved for Laura Tierney, a tenor saxophone began to croon, low and yearning and kinda hopeful.
You have been listening to The Private Investigator, Winter Reprise, written by Barbara Jennings, directed by Emmeline Braefield, with Tom Black as PI Webster, and Lydia Kenny as Mrs. Tierney and Mrs. Brody, produced by Cat on a Piano Productions. For a full list of the music used in the episode, please see the show notes. The Theatrephonic Theme Tune was composed by Jackson Pentland and performed by Lydia Kenny. For more information about the Theatrephonic podcast, go to theatrephonic.com, tweet or Instagram us at Theatrephonic, or visit our Facebook page. If you enjoy Theatrephonic and would like to get more content, please consider becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/Theatrephonic. Please don't forget to rate and review. Thank you for listening.